The wind howled through the skeletal trees, twisting the barren branches into gnarled claws that seemed to scrape against the sky. The small town of Westbrook lay silent beneath a cold October moon, its streets deserted as if the entire town were holding its breath. At the edge of the town, past the broken fence and the overgrown fields, the old farmhouse sat like a rotting corpse, abandoned for decades. No one dared go near it, not since the disappearances. But tonight, Ella and her friends were looking for a thrill. They had heard the stories. Everyone had. The tale of old Farmer Greaves, the man who had once lived in that farmhouse. How, after a bad harvest, he had gone mad, his mind unraveling in the isolation of that place. One night, they said, something in him snapped. He took an axe and slaughtered his entire family, his wife, his 2 children, and even the hired hands who lived on the farm. They said the house had never been the same after that. Even before the disappearances began, locals swore they could hear screams coming from the house late at night or see strange lights flickering in the windows. But Ella and her friends weren't afraid of stories. They didn't believe in ghosts or curses or whatever else the townspeople muttered about when they talked of the old farmhouse. To them, it was just another creepy old house, perfect for a Halloween dare. The plan was simple: go in, stay for an hour, and leave with bragging rights. Ella led the group of 5 as they trudged down the narrow path toward the house, the glow from her flashlight barely cutting through the thick mist that clung to the ground. Her breath fogged the air as she glanced back at her friends. Brandon, her boyfriend, tried to look brave, but she could see the tension in his jaw. Tara and Mike were laughing nervously, trying to keep the mood light, while Jake, the quietest of the group, brought up the rear, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Come on, it's just an old house," Ella said, more to herself than anyone else. "We'll be in and out in no time." The house loomed larger as they approached, its broken windows like hollow eyes, watching them. The wind rattled the loose shutters, and the porch sagged under the weight of years of neglect. As they stepped up to the front door, the wood creaked ominously beneath their feet. Ella hesitated for a moment, staring at the door's faded, peeling paint. Her hand hovered over the rusted doorknob, and for the first time that night, she felt a knot of unease twist in her stomach. She shook it off and turned the knob. The door swung open with a groan, revealing the darkness beyond. Dust swirled in the air, illuminated by the thin beam of her flashlight. The smell hit them first, a musty, damp odor, mixed with something else, something faintly metallic. Ella wrinkled her nose but stepped inside, the others following close behind. The foyer was small, with a sagging staircase on the left and a narrow hallway leading deeper into the house. The wallpaper was peeling, and the wooden floor was warped and cracked in places. The silence pressed in on them, thick and oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. Ella's flashlight flickered as they moved farther inside, casting jittery shadows that danced on the walls. They started exploring, moving from room to room. The living room was a time capsule, as if the occupants had simply vanished one day, leaving everything behind. Old furniture covered in a thick layer of dust stood like ghosts of the past. A tattered rug lay in the center of the room, and above the fireplace hung a faded portrait of a stern-looking man, Farmer Greaves. They all assumed. His eyes seemed to follow them, cold and unfeeling, as they moved about the room. "Man, this place is giving me the creeps," Brandon muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Relax," Tara said with a nervous laugh. "It's just an old house. Nothing to be scared of." But as they continued deeper into the house, the air grew heavier, colder. It felt like the house was watching them, waiting. The hairs on the back of Ella's neck stood on end. She had never believed in the supernatural, but something about this place felt wrong. Not just creepy, but wrong, like they weren't supposed to be there. The group made their way to the kitchen, where the smell of decay was stronger. The old appliances were rusted, the cupboards hanging open, revealing shelves empty except for the occasional mouse nest. A faded calendar hung on the wall, stopped forever on a date decades ago. Ella glanced at it, a chill creeping up her spine. The date matched the day of the massacre. "Hey, do you guys hear that?" Jake's voice was low, his eyes darting toward the hallway. They all stopped and listened. At first, there was only silence. Then faintly from somewhere upstairs came a soft thudding sound. It was slow, methodical, like something being dragged across the floor. Everyone exchanged nervous glances. "It's probably just the house settling," Mike said. though his voice lacked confidence. But Ella knew that wasn't true. That sound was too deliberate, too real. Her heart began to race, her palms growing slick with sweat. The thudding continued, rhythmic and steady. Her mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, but there was none. Something was up there. "Let's check it out," Brandon said, though his voice wavered slightly. The group moved cautiously toward the staircase, the thudding growing louder as they climbed the creaking steps. Each footfall echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. The second floor was darker than the first, the shadows longer, deeper. Ella's flashlight flickered again as they made their way down the narrow hallway. The thudding was louder now, coming from the last room on the left. As they reached the door, the sound suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, pressing in on them from all sides. Ella's hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob, the metal icy cold beneath her fingers. Slowly, she pushed the door open. The room beyond was empty, save for the heavy wooden wardrobe standing against the far wall. It was old, its doors slightly ajar, casting a long shadow across the room. Ella's flashlight flickered once more before going out completely, plunging them into darkness. She cursed under her breath, fumbling with the flashlight, but it wouldn't turn back on. The room was cold now, unnaturally so, and the air felt thick, like something unseen was pressing down on them. A low, guttural sound came from the wardrobe, a rasping breath, barely audible. Everyone froze. Brandon reached for Ella's arm, his grip tight as they all stared at the wardrobe. The door creaked slowly open, revealing a sliver of darkness so deep it seemed to swallow the light. Then it moved. A figure stepped out of the wardrobe, tall and thin, its limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Its face was a pale, distorted mask, the eyes hollow and black. The thing moved with a jerking, unnatural motion, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. A terrible, choking sound came from its throat, a gurgling, wet noise that made Ella's stomach turn. The creature lunged toward them with unnatural speed, its long arms reaching out, fingers twisted into claws. The group screamed, turning to run, but the hallway seemed to stretch impossibly long, the walls closing in around them. Ella's heart pounded in her ears as she ran, the sound of footsteps behind her growing louder. She could hear Brandon shouting her name, but the words were distorted, distant. Suddenly she was falling. Her foot caught on something and she tumbled down the stairs, the world spinning around her. Pain shot through her ankle as she hit the ground, gasping for breath. The others were gone. The house seemed to close in around her, the walls breathing alive. She tried to stand, but her ankle gave way, the pain too intense. Panic gripped her as she crawled toward the front door, her hands slipping on the cold, slick floor. Behind her, she could hear the thing descending the stairs, its breath ragged, hungry. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, she reached the door and pulled herself to her feet. But the door wouldn't budge. No matter how hard she pulled, it wouldn't open. The creature was closer now, so close she could feel the cold radiating from its body. The last thing she saw before the world went dark was the pale, twisted face of the creature, its hollow eyes locking onto hers, filled with hunger. When the authorities came the next day, they found the farmhouse empty. There were no signs of Ella or her friends, just bloodstains on the floor and walls, and the faint echo of screams that seemed to linger in the air. The town spoke of the farmhouse again, the old legends rekindled with new urgency, but no one ever dared to enter. Some said the house itself had claimed them, feeding on the souls of those who were foolish enough to venture inside. Others whispered of the creature that still roamed its halls, a remnant of the madness that had consumed Farmer Greaves all those years ago. But no one ever found out what really happened to Ella and her friends. Some nights, when the wind howled just right, people swore they could still hear her voice crying for help. Trapped forever.